Hello, thank you, Benjamin. I'm sorry I didn't listen to your whole talk, but I'm sure it was excellent. So now it's time to talk a little bit about cyber criminals, not so much about cyber crimes, although I have 5 examples of how they have failed, and I'll tell you all about it. But first, a couple of things about me. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Antti Kurittu. I currently work as the Digital Forensics and Incident Response Team Lead at Nixu. And here's my short CV, so to speak, a short background. So I started about 10 years ago at the Helsinki Police Department as a junior constable and then a senior detective constable doing ICT crime investigations. It was 10 years ago, so they didn't really talk about cybercrime investigations at that time. It was ICT, also ATK in Finnish, although they call it tietotekniikkarikokset. So that's where I got my first and actually my best understanding of what kind of people commit what we now call cybercrimes. So from there, I moved to Traficom NCSCFI, the National Cybersecurity Center of Finland, and worked as a security specialist for a couple of years. In that role, it wasn't so much investigating cases as it was more about understanding the mechanics behind them and the technology and what's happening in these cases. When the police perspective is who did it, and the NCSCFI perspective is rather what happened and what does this mean. So after a few years with the National Cybersecurity Center, a detective sergeant position opened up in the Helsinki Police Department. So I decided to join back there. So I got the job and I went back to my old unit, doing some cybercrime investigations again and ICT crime investigations. And one thing to say about that is that when the police investigate computer crime, it's not just cybercrime as we understand it. It's more about how technology relates to other crime and doing forensics for all kinds of stuff. So I had the possibility to join all kinds of investigations like violent crime and well, everything you can think about. If there's a phone or a computer involved, then well, it's the ICT guys who might get involved in that. But after spending some time there, I decided that I was happier at the NCSCFI. The work was different and it was a bit more, let's say, forward looking with better possibilities for my career. So I rejoined and worked with cyber exercises for a few years. And a year and a half ago, I joined Nixu as an evil capitalist and started to lead the DFIR team there. So I'm back at investigating cases, but now the level of abstraction is different. I don't investigate cases with technical tools. Rather, I have a team of great people who do the investigations, and I get to be a part of that. And that's a real joy and privilege in my life. But I wanted to talk about criminals as people, just because I've met a bunch, and I think the unique perspective that you get from policing is that you actually get to meet people who would be classified as cyber criminals. Because most security professionals, we have a thick layer between us and the bad actors. But I don't like that term. If it's Ben Affleck doing the crime, then I can call him a bad actor. But I like to talk about criminals because I like to see them as criminals. And threat actor or bad actor just doesn't sound very good to me. We get to see those people and speak with them and kind of try to understand what makes them tick and have a different perspective on all of this. And this is something I'd like to share here. So when we're talking about cyber criminals, we of course have different tiers there. We have the nation state threat actor level of people who sometimes get indicted by the US Supreme Court and named and shamed in FBI affidavits. And these are I'd say, the highest echelon of these people and these criminals. And some of them work for spy agencies and some of them are just high-level organized crime well-resourced and well-trained and working a 9-to-5 job doing cybercrime. So there has been some talk about what is the difference between cyber criminals and these nation state people. It seems, at least in Russia, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. So is Evil Corp actually an extension of the spying apparatus there, or is it working under its auspices, or does it actually have government funding? It's hard to say. We don't know. At least it seems that most of the damage is happening somewhere else than the countries that are being suspected of harboring these criminals. Well, that's all and good, and those guys get a lot of press and a lot of interest in them, but I'd say that they are a very small % of the actual cyber criminals out there, the people who do the bulk of the crime and most of the crime. I think the medium-skilled criminals are a bit of a bigger problem, because we have an economy here, of course, and the medium-skilled criminals are the initial access brokers, who are the people who get access to organizations and then sell that access to somebody else. We have the scammers and phishers and all of these people who make money not with sophisticated malware or long campaigns, but rather just abusing our trust and reliance on computing equipment. I'd say that BEC scammers and CEO fraud people and all of these are cyber criminals, but they're medium skilled at best, if even that. And then we have the large bulk of these low-skilled criminals. And the thing is that these low-skilled criminals might be actually low-skilled only in the tech part of the thing, but they are quite skilled as criminals, which makes them a bit more difficult to catch, because they might be, let's say, organized crime that realizes that it's better to do ransomware than to sell drugs, and then they pivot to that. So they come from this criminal background and this mindset, and not from the black hat hacking community, but they will find each other, and these low-skilled people are buying services from the medium and high-level skilled people to do crime. And of course, we have the low-skilled hackers there also, the people who are doing the tedious job. But this is what we usually see when somebody gets breached. They say that we were breached by a highly skilled adversary. And judging by the amount of these headlines that I see when companies get breached, it seems like there are only highly skilled adversaries there. And it only takes a highly skilled adversary for any company to fall. Well, in my experience, most attacks that result in problems are not done by highly skilled adversaries. They're done by mostly medium skilled or low skilled adversaries using an economy of mistakes and purchasing different services from each other. For example, you buy initial access from an initial access broker, you buy your malware, your ransom software from somebody else, and then you go in and you install the ransom software, and then you try to get the ransom. None of these people is highly skilled, possibly the person who has programmed the actual ransomware, but not even necessarily them. It doesn't really sound like such a complicated software program to write a program that encrypts files. But this is, of course, the line, and this is kind of this is selling the life of the high-level cyber criminal to other aspiring cyber criminals, which is sort of weird to me that they are kind of banging the drum. And I was wondering, because these APT groups get all these cool names, and they've changed now that they are using UNC and then a number, or an APT and a number. But whenever I hear some APT group being attributed with a really cool name, it just sounds like a sneaker ad to me. Just join us. This is the glamorous life. But the fact is that life of crime is not really that glamorous. It's not champagne and private jets. It's more about being worried and checking over your shoulder. I'm not sure if you guys saw the pictures of the Emotet guy's apartment. and when they did the home search there. I don't have copyright to those images, so I don't have them there here. But the state of the apartment of those people who were running one of the most dangerous malware networks in the world was just, it was just sad. It was like a teenage boy's house. And it looked like nobody who is actually doing well in life lives under those circumstances. It was just a peek into the life of the criminal. Of course, there are differences here, but I'd say that most of the common crime is really drudgerous. And we have actually stats to back this up, and we have, sorry, I'm at loss with words here. We have a case study where they interview people who had stopped cybercrime. A lot of them said that the reason they stopped is because it got so boring. That the jet set lifestyle of the star hacker or the criminal kingpin really wasn't what it actually was. And now that cybercrime has gotten so big and there's so much of it, it has really built its own economy. And where you have economy, you have tiering of jobs, and then you have the fast food clerk jobs, and then you have the CEO jobs, and then you have the millionaire entrepreneur jobs there. But as we know from common experience with life is that we have a lot more of those tedious jobs, these low fulfillment jobs, than we have the upper hierarchy interesting jobs. So it just seems that for a lot of cyber criminals these days, it's quite a situation when they realize that their cool life of hacking is resembling a help desk job more than being something charismatic and being a deviant. And that is a way out for a lot of these people from cybercrime. And it's starting to resemble low-level work in drug dealing gangs, which is a good way to put it. Of course, drug dealing gangs often victimize people who have no other options. And I'm sure a lot of cybercrime, especially internationally, is coming from the same situation, that you don't really have that much options in a poor country, for example, and somebody offers you a nice clean way to make a lot of money without risking your body. So they start working for some higher up cyber criminal, and they too do a lot of tedious work for a small amount of money. So what does this have to do with failing? Well, the thing is, the more cybercrime looks like a job, the more it looks like just running a business, the more likely it, of course, is that people are starting to get burned out by it. And being burned out means that you start making mistakes. And when you think about a cybercrime service, let's say that you're providing a booter, for example, a DDoS stressing service. The things you need to do is you have to have marketing. Of course, people need to know about your product and service. You need to have systems administration. Of course, you have infrastructure that you have to keep up to date. There's maintenance, there's accounting. You send out invoices and then you get paid. You have to design your service. You have to design your system. You have to get your bot somewhere, and you have to respond to sales queries. You have customer service. Then you have bug fixes, updates, and patching. So a lot of this, at least to me, sounds quite familiar. It's just like, okay, are you describing just having a job? Well, no. The other part is that when you have a job, you don't have all the extra worries that criminals have, like operational security and not getting scammed by other criminals. Because if you're dealing with criminals, well, there's no such thing as honor among thieves. That's just a joke. It's not actually even remotely true. And then you have to worry about law enforcement and the authorities. You need to find reliable partners. Where are you going to find those? On the internet? Sure. Okay, but are they reliable, and how reliable? And where do you find your reliable customers? So you have all these issues, and the only plus side is that you don't have to pay taxes and you get to do something that's not possibly permitted by law. So maybe just start a company. But there's a couple of points here that I want to make, and this will help you probably understand the life of the common criminal a bit better. Crime really isn't glamorous. What we see on TV, that's not what I saw when I was working with the police. Most of those criminals, they weren't the charismatic mafiosos that you see on TV. They were just people who made a lot of bad mistakes. And some of those people were just, well, it's hard to describe them as anything else than evil, but that's not very trendy right now to set things in those terms. But most of them had at least made serious mistakes in their life. They had issues like drug problems and alcohol issues and problems with their family, and the life of crime kind of maybe chose them more than they chose it. And of course, operational security, well, they say it's hard, but I think it's impossible. It's because the thing with operational security is that you have to do it perfectly, because you can't half-ass it. It's not OPSEC if you half-ass it. It's just partial OPSEC, and that doesn't really work. And everybody makes mistakes. And that is, I think this is the biggest point of this talk, and why I wanted to talk about this. And I hope you'll bear with me, because this is the first time I've been presenting these slides or even talking about these issues here in public. So first of all, I have no idea how my timing is and if these stories are even interesting, but each of them is a good example of how real life criminals actually make mistakes that cause them to get caught. And of course, these stories are not advice for criminals. These are not to be taken as, okay, I'll just check that box and check this box and now I'll be safe. I'm trying to represent them as a hopeful message, because often when we're dealing with cybercrime, nobody even really takes seriously the idea of these ransomware people getting caught, for example, like the Dark Side Gang or Evil Corp or any of these. It's just it's like the dark side of the force. It's just always there and it's causing problems, but nobody is really expecting to see anybody in handcuffs or in jail. But these are examples that didn't really make the papers, at least just maybe a small news somewhere. I'm not telling you any details about the people involved, and no sentencing details or anything like that. I'll just give you the gist of the case. And all of these are based on true stories. They're not necessarily my investigations. And I want you all to remember that all it takes is one mistake. And that one mistake is usually enough to get caught. And that's the fail in this crime. So number 5, I'm counting down from 5 to 1. So there was this case where Mr. A was reading the email of his own lawyer, who was settling a dispute between him and Mr. B. And these guys were business partners, and they were having some problems, and they had hired this lawyer to help them settle the score and draft some kind of an exit agreement or something like that. But the thing was that this company was also providing the email services for the lawyer. So Mr. A and probably Mr. B knew the lawyer's email's password, because he was a typical person, by which I mean he knew not much about computers. And when he had computer issues, he brought the computer to Mr. A, who gladly fixed it for him. And for that purpose, he had given him his email password. Okay, well, that's a fail on itself. But then again, people trust people, especially people that hire you to help them. So he really didn't think about it that much. But one time, the lawyer noticed that he had a sent message in his trash can, in his trash folder, and he was wondering that he hasn't sent this message. And it was sent to Mr. A, and it included some details of the case that the lawyer was mediating, because he was having confidential discussions with both Mr. A and Mr. B, trying to reach some kind of an agreement. So it was supposed to be a neutral party. But Mr. A had decided to tip the scales in his favor. But he wasn't much of a cyber criminal, so he just sent himself a message instead of doing something else, and then forgot to delete it from the sent folder. Actually, he deleted it from the sent folder, but forgot to remove it from the trash folder. So the lawyer called the police and the case was investigated. So we went to arrest Mr. A, just to have him on the police station and make some queries, because this was actually quite a big case. And we just missed him. He was not at home in the morning when the police went there, but his wife was at home. So she was informed that the police would like to speak with your husband. But we went to the office to find the guy, and he came there by taxi. So we found a systems admin there and told him that we need some log files and we need this and this and these logs, and here's the USB drive, so please get copying. And the systems admin gave me the logs, and I threw them into Splunk and started seeing the connections. So we saw that the Mr. A had connected from his home IP through VPN to a laptop over RDP at the company premises, and used that laptop to connect the webmail session to an on-premises exchange using Outlook web access, and used that to go to the lawyer's inbox and then send the messages to him. So I was able to parse this together from the logs, but we didn't have that laptop. So we were kind of out of luck because basically we didn't have the so-called murder weapon. But I was sitting in the sauna with my family and just deep in thought, and then it just kind of dawned on me that we should probably check the car that he took for repairs, because his wife probably called him. And that's where we found the laptop. And that was quite a good example of how people think, because if you do crimes, serious crimes, and you have a laptop and the police don't have it yet, you have several options there. One of the worst options is to just stick it under the floor mat of your car. This is actually a recreation of the situation, because I didn't have the original photo here with me, of course, but I did have a car and a laptop, so I just recreated where it was. So here's a pretty bad failure: just getting attached to hardware and not being able to let go or even think further. Not to mention the other operational security failures that there were happening before. So we did a forensic investigation of the unencrypted laptop. Of course, it was unencrypted. This was years ago, and then encryption wasn't standard, and saw that it was used to access the inbox. So we had the full chain of logs implicating him. So that was that, and that was fail number 5. This was different. This is a case that I keep coming back to in my mind every once in a while when I think about pathological male behavior towards women and the world in general, and it's kind of just stuck with me for some reason. And there was this suspect, this guy, and he was investigated for stalking his ex-girlfriend, and he had been slightly violent against her. They had an argument, and he had grabbed her by the shoulders, causing bruises, and she was filing a report about that assault. I think it's lievä pahoinpitely. I'm not sure what it's probably minor assault or something like this in English. And the case was being investigated by somebody I knew from the police station, and she just came up to me and said that my victim here is saying that this stalker has accessed her Facebook account. So is that illegal? I was like, fuck yeah, it's illegal. That's computer break-in, and it's 2 years or a fine. So it's actually quite a serious crime. And he was also messing with her email. So I said, let's go and pay him a visit, and I'll grab his computer and see what he's been up to. So we went to the suspect's home, where he had a desktop computer. This was years ago, so we used to have desktop computers. I'm not sure if you remember, it's about a box about this size, and the funny thing is it doesn't have a keyboard or a screen attached to it. They are separate, and you buy them separately, like the ones you have on your laptop at home. But he had one of those, and he was kind of a out of his luck guy. He didn't really have a job or a place of his own, so this was actually his parents' place. And when they were dating, he had dragged that box to his girlfriend's place where they both used the computer. And then they broke up and he left and he stayed away for a couple of months, and then he came and got the computer back. Well, we got the computer at the police station and I did an image of it and started doing some forensics with Encase, just trying to see what's going on and maybe find her password there to see that he actually has it plain text somewhere. And I kept hitting this really big file. I think it was, I can't remember, it's been a while, but maybe 1.5 gigabytes or something like that. It was in an unknown format, but it had clear text strings all around it. And I realized it's a keylogger log file in a proprietary format. So I checked the computer more carefully and I found that he had installed software called the best keylogger. I would have found an actual screenshot of it, but then again, hey, go to Google and try to find the software called the best keylogger. It's not possible, so I just took best free keylogger. This is not the actual software, but it's close enough. So he had installed this keylogger on the computer a few minutes before retrieving it and got all the credentials and started a really aggressive several-month campaign of harassing his ex-girlfriend. And this was sort of apparent in this whole thing because I forgot to turn off the keylogger. So, so what he did, he installed the keylogger and then he left the computer there for a couple of months. Then he took it home and started cyber stalking this girl for several months, keylogging all his crimes with the same keylogger that he used to steal the passwords. I spelled it out there for the benefit of everybody. So if you keylog your own crimes and leave a log on the computer that then ends up in the hands of the police, that's not good for you. So please do that, because I don't want criminals to have good times, but well, this person sure didn't. But it's just it's just a good example that all it takes is one mistake. Just forget to remove the software, and then things happen and other things happen and something takes a U-turn, and by happenstance the investigator took seriously the claim that this guy had hacked the Facebook account. So I went and had a look and we found it. I think I filed 5 or 6 different criminal reports based on the keylogging data alone, plus corroborating factors. Of course, the keylog wasn't the only thing we had. We had other things too, because it just gave us a very good timestamp and a timeline of events, and then we could investigate. Up to fail number 3. So DDoS. We had a couple of youngsters who were messing around. They were DDoSing a bunch of websites, and the way they were doing it is that they were not opening connections or directing too much traffic there or anything like that. They realized that there are in such a way configured websites that if you search for star, it will actually retrieve everything and show it to you. And this takes a long time and takes a lot of resources. So that's what they did. So they searched for these services that would accept star as a search criteria. And then they did that from several IP addresses. And then I guess they felt really good about themselves when the website died. I never really understood the power trip of watching a browser trying to load a website and it won't load. It doesn't just feel, it really doesn't have that oomph in my opinion, but I guess that's somebody's thing. So that's what they did, and they were causing actually a lot of problems for a lot of companies and organizations, and this was being investigated quite thoroughly, and I think there was some Twitter bullshit involved also, but one thing, and they tested this very carefully manually first, just finding those websites that would be vulnerable for this kind of a resource exhaustion attacks. And they always used the VPN except once. And well, that's enough, because when you have a log, an access log, and the access log shows the search query as a get parameter, and you know what kind of search query as a get parameter causes resource exhaustion. And then you see that you have 10 million queries there, all coming from a VPN and exit node, and just a couple of them before coming from an ELISA ADSL, as an example. Then you know, well, maybe this is the IP address of the person who's doing it. Turns out it was, and there was a lot of other proof also found later on. But yeah, what's the fail here? Well, first of all, if you're gonna do some serious crime, maybe get out of your mom's basement and go to a library or something and just, because VPN, the thing is, you really have to trust that software. They see that it actually works and test it all the time. And when it once just fails, it says that it's on and it's not on, and then you do some crime, you connect the IP address right back at you. Because it's not a secret that the police have access to ISPs that we can find out a Finnish IP addresses subscriber. Of course we can, and of course it's essential to find out who owns an IP address where crime are coming from. This one I actually didn't investigate personally, or it wasn't investigated by anybody I know, but this is a pretty good example of how even the most serious criminals running huge criminal enterprises, Silk Road in this example, make really common mistakes at the beginning of their career. Ross Ulbricht, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, so I'll just say Ulbricht. So he was Dread Pirate Roberts, who was running Silk Road. And Silk Road was this one of the first darknet markets that you could buy anything off of. Guns, drugs, basically anything. It was based on his libertarian utopian ideal that government shouldn't have any control over free enterprise. So he based these ideas on this Austrian economist called Ludwig von Mises, and he quoted him at length, and he was certainly a man who was possessed by an idea. And this idea was his brand of libertarianism, and he had thought that technology would provide a perfect solution for him to start this libertarian marketplace. So that's what he did, and he started Silk Road. And in the beginning, well, it was a startup company basically, and he was coding it himself, and he had some issues and he didn't really know how everything works. So he went where everybody goes when you have an issue with coding. He went to Stack Exchange 8 years ago, actually 8 years and 2 months ago to be exact, because I took this screenshot a couple of days ago. And he was asking, how can I connect to a Tor hidden service using curl in PHP? The issue was that he was actually using an account called Rost Ulbricht. And when he realized that I am asking how to develop this criminal enterprise under my own name, he just went and quickly changed the name to Frosty. Well, his name was picked up, and it was noted into a small black notebook somewhere that law enforcement officials keep. Then he started mentioning Silk Road on the forums, different kinds of forums, and he was, well, the first mention of Silk Road was on this forum called shroomery.org, which is for users of magic mushrooms, who incidentally were one of his biggest customers. So he sold a lot of mushrooms to them, facilitated sales of mushrooms to be exact. And he used the name Altoid, which some of you might know. It's a brand of breath mints that comes in a small tin, and it's a hacker favorite tinker toy to create something that fits in an Altoid box. So I think that's where it comes from. But then he was looking for somebody to help him with the Bitcoin end of things, because this being cybercrime on Tor, so of course Bitcoin is involved. And he was looking for a Bitcoin pro to join his startup company. And of course, the address that he listed was rossulbricht@gmail.com, using the name Altoid, also using the same name for the first public mention of Silk Road. So small things, but when you're actually running this size of an empire, and making millions and millions in illicit drug money and other services, well, people will pick up on those small things. That message is still online. And the thing is that whatever you put on the internet is probably permanently on the internet. And 2 independent investigations actually uncovered his identity as Dread Pirate Roberts. The first was an IRS agent whose name I've sadly forgotten, but it didn't really go anywhere. He was looking at the money laundering aspect of it, because of course they're the tax people, so they're interested in that. And the FBI was also very interested. Well, the problem with Ross was that he was basically just unable to predict the future. He didn't know what size his criminal empire will grow to be when he posted that one message 8 years ago. He didn't have the gravity of the situation in mind when he started his illicit enterprise, which meant that he did not have the necessarily careful mindset that it takes to run something like Silk Road and not get caught. So he got caught. And I think this is probably true for a lot of hackers, especially hackers. I'm saying hackers here because hackers are working in this environment where one big currency that they have is their fame. And the thing about fame is that you can't sell fame and you can't transfer fame from one wallet to another. You have to attach fame to something that's recognized. And when you don't want to bring anything about yourself to the public eye, you only have your nickname that has that fame recognition. So that is your brand. And that is basically the promise. As in Finnish, they say nimi takaa laadun. The name guarantees the quality. So that they have this attachment to that name, which means that when they start young and when they start small, they might be quite open about that name, and they might even, another real life example, create web pages that are legitimate web pages with a copyright with their real name and their hacker email address underneath it, because they weren't hacking then, but they started hacking 6 months later, and then they had that name and they wanted to hang on to that name, but they forgot that one breadcrumb on the internet. And that one breadcrumb which connects their real name with their hacker alias. And that's enough, because when you have that little bit of string that you can start pulling on, then the whole sweater will unravel, so to speak. So Ross's problem was that Ross wasn't able to predict the future. So get that under control if you want to do crime. I just chose something very, well, contemporary for the last fail, because we all watched Ransom Man first try to extort Vastaamo for 450,000 or what was it, and after failing that, trying to extort the poor patients who lost their psychological the patient records to criminals, and then he tried to extort those, and that also failed. I think he got a few payments out of it based on some Bitcoin forensics, but not much when you compare what kind of a risk he's taking and what kind of a damage it's causing. But I think the biggest fail here was when he actually zipped up his own home folder on the hacking box that he was using and put it on the Tor server that he was using to share the customer details or the customer information. And he stuck it there. I have no idea how this happened, why it happened, but I have a theory. And I'll tell you that theory at the end of this presentation, but that's what he did. So I didn't even point out the fail here. It's all quite clear here and easy to see. But just putting your whole hacking box home folder to the Tor site for several hours is not a good idea if you don't want to get caught, and when you have committed one of the worst cyber crimes in Finnish history, possibly European history. So don't do that. And if you see the timestamp there, it's 1 minute past, and we of course had an automatic scraper at Nixu running against that, and our scraper triggered at too fast. So we locked out there. If it had triggered at 0, well, we would have gotten a little less of the package that we got. But good job, clown. I often run into the idea that people say that I don't think that's what they did. That wouldn't make any sense. And after 10 years in cybersecurity and almost 20 years in security in general, I've felt that people often do a lot of stuff that doesn't make any sense. And they do things that make sense at the time, but then they realize the effects of what they've done, and they start making less sense, and then they hope they have a time machine so that they can go back to 1984 and undo all the mistakes in their life. So never base your theory on the assumption that the suspect will act in an intelligent and rational way, because people are not rational and very few of us are intelligent. Actually, this might be offensive, but half of the population is less intelligent than average. But that's not offensive because that's how averages work. So that's good to keep in mind. Not all cyber criminals are geniuses. Some of them are, not all of them, not even most. So this is a good example. Well, it's this time of year, so we all have the same examples. Benjamin also spoke about Colonial Pipeline, but I want to draw a mental image of these guys that they stopped the Colonial Pipeline and caused a huge gas crisis in the US. And Benjamin was focusing more on why they stopped the service. I don't know what the point was. Those papers aren't out yet, so there might be other reasons also than just not being able to bill people. Might be that they had reason to believe that there's somebody in the OT network or whatever. I wasn't doing the DFIR, so I won't speculate. There are several options available. But what happened? Well, they got paid. The DarkSide ransomware got paid and they're restarting, but the gas crisis is still ongoing. And when you look at this picture, you start to get this, place yourself in the shoes of the DarkSide gang. And if you don't get the sense of impending doom when looking at this and this oh shit feeling that we probably did something worse than we were prepared for, well, then you're not role-playing this role very well. Well, first they put out a press statement that we didn't mean to create problems. We just stopped this. Well, we've heard this before. Like, if you don't mean to create problems, stop running ransomware, you asshole. So that's not an excuse. And this whole highbrow stuff about not hitting governments and not hitting healthcare, everything's interconnected. If you hit a pipeline that size, you're going to hit a government. And the problem with hitting governments is that some governments might hit back. And I think they kind of realized this because the hacking forum XSS bans all ransomware topics, like straight out, like we're done with this shit. And they're also banned on Exploit Cybercrime Forum. And these are Russian organized crime cybercrime forums. These are not like 4chan or Ylilauta, where moderation tries to keep the stuff a bit civil but allows for some craziness. No, these are criminal forums. And they're even getting to dropping it like a hot potato. It's like, fuck, we're not touching that anymore. So it's gone. And the DarkSide guys or girls also drew the realistic conclusion that we should probably just burn everything we own and just move to Kazakhstan with our 5 million or 45 or 500 million. Nobody knows how much money they have in Bitcoin, and try to start our lives again, and maybe not go near a computer for a while, because these kinds of attacks will amp up interest in a way that is not good for these criminals. So to sum it up, and just to try to learn a lesson about all these 5 fails that I've spoken about. These are trivial examples. These are just the day-to-day stuff of cybercrime investigations, and I just thought they were good examples. But cyber criminals are criminals, criminals are people, and if you know people do dumb shit all the time, and all you need is that one mistake, just that one mistake, And all the criminal has to do is to avoid doing that one mistake. And it's really hard to find a criminal that doesn't make one mistake, like seriously, one. Well, I think our job as the cybercrime investigators, which we all are as we are cybersecurity pros, we don't do criminal investigations as such, but well, all cyber security incidents, they have a side of crime on them, usually. All we need to do is find that one mistake. So go find that mistake. That is my presentation and pep talk. So thank you. Do you have any questions?
Okay, so I do have there was a lot of questions. Thank you, Antti, for the talk. And I got some of them here. So let's get started. How many really advanced criminals have you encountered? Advanced meaning it's really hard to find the evidence and notice the mistake or find information about them.
That's a really tough question. I've met a couple of really advanced hackers, like people who are very, very good with computers. But it was really easy to find evidence of their crimes. So it's hard to say if this is what you mean, because, well, in one example, unencrypted hard drive, chat logs of everything, malware samples, like the whole lot. The problem was that there was so much proof that we had to figure out what to include and what to exclude, and we had to exclude most of it because it was just a rabbit hole on that hard drive. But it was very good technically, very, very good technically, especially given his age. So one example there. Of course, we always run up to these situations where we have no idea who the attacker is. And that could be just because they covered their tracks enough, or that we don't have the resources to dig deep enough. So hard to say. It's like how many unicorns you haven't seen. Like, well, all of them, none, some. But good question, good question.
Okay, and then the next one, what would you say to those who probably have already tasted the so-called dark side of cybersecurity, young adults and preteens interested in all things cyber and do not know yet which side to choose?
I'll say that when you're young, making a lot of money seems like that's the reason why people get good jobs. And that's not actually not even remotely true. It's true when you don't have money, but when you have, let's say, 4,000 euros a month, everything over that is just extra, depending, of course, on your situation and your living expenses, yada, yada, yada. But after that, it comes down to the purpose of your job and what you're doing and what it brings you, and do you get to make a positive difference in the world, or is what you're doing making a negative difference in the world? So crime makes a negative difference in the world, but it has a lot of money. Sure, short term usually, and if you get high enough. But now it starts to be the situation that there's not even that much money, makes a negative difference in the world, and there's no career path there, and you can't even tell anybody really what you're doing. So just think really wisely. If you're interested in this stuff, there's enough work to do on the white hat side. There's enough jobs. But the thing is that you have to pay your dues. You have to start low and then build up. And if you're good, start at a SOC and just work and take every job you have seriously and try to be the best at it. And life will reward you with better and more interesting jobs. And just taking a shortcut by hacking companies and extorting people, it might be interesting for a while, but it's going to end up badly. And it's not a very good life choice.
Okay, I think we don't have time for more questions. They were really awesome questions that I needed to left out. So thank you, Antti, for this one, and we'll be having a short break again and then to the next talk.
Thank you, Antti out.